The humiliation. She never imagined that humiliation could feel this quiet. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just the soft scrape of a mop against polished marble, and people pretending she didn't exist. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, all gold light and expensive laughter. The kind of place where dresses cost more than rent and shoes never touched the ground without purpose. And there she was, on her knees, wearing a gray cleaning uniform that didn't even have her name stitched on it. Just staff. Her hands shook as she wrung out the mop, fingers red from chemical cleaner. The spill hadn't been her fault. Someone had knocked over a champagne tower, on purpose she suspected, but she was the one ordered to clean it. Immediately. In front of everyone. Careful, a woman's voice said sharply behind her. That marble is imported. Don't scratch it. The woman didn't look at her face. She looked at the floor. I'm doing my best, she replied softly. The woman scoffed. Well, try harder. Some of us paid a lot to be here. Laughter followed. Not cruel laughter, worse. Polite laughter. The kind that pretended nothing wrong was happening. She swallowed hard and lowered her head. Tonight was supposed to be easy. Just another shift at the luxury hotel hosting a high-profile charity gala. Politicians, CEOs, media. The kind of event where the word kindness was printed on banners while dignity was quietly crushed beneath heels. She had taken the job because she needed the money. Because bills didn't care about pride. Because life had a way of pushing people into corners and daring them to complain. Someone brushed past her, heels splashing through the damp floor. Oh my God, watch it, a man snapped. Do you know how much these shoes cost? She looked up instinctively. I'm sorry, sir. He waved a dismissive hand. Just move. Move. As if she were furniture. As if she were invisible. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She never did. Silence had become a survival skill. From the corner of her eye, she noticed people staring. Some curious. Some amused. Most indifferent. A few phones subtly lifted, capturing the moment without shame. She felt something heavy rise in her chest. Not anger. Something colder. Something quieter. She finished mopping and stood, muscles aching, spine stiff. As she turned to leave, a man stepped into her path. Tall. Perfect suit. The kind of confidence that came from never being told no. You missed a spot, he said calmly, pointing with his shoe. She stared at it. There was no spill there. I don't see. Are you arguing? He interrupted, raising an eyebrow. You people always do that. No attention to detail. The words hit harder than they should have. You people. The room seemed to hold its breath. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She could feel it now, the heat behind her eyes, the pressure in her chest. The moment where something inside her begged to explode. But she bent down anyway. Because that's what she was expected to do. As she scrubbed an imaginary stain, her reflection stared back at her in the polished marble. Tired eyes. Controlled expression. A woman swallowing herself to make others comfortable. Someone nearby whispered, at least she knows her place. That was it. Something inside her cracked. Not loudly, not violently, but completely. She stood up slowly. Very slowly. For the first time that night, she didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't rush. She just looked at them. At all of them. And in that moment, as the music swelled and glasses clinked and laughter continued like nothing had happened, she realized something that made her breath catch. They had no idea who she was. No idea what she had built. No idea what she owned. No idea what power looked like when it didn't announce itself. And suddenly, the humiliation didn't shrink her. It sharpened her. Because she didn't just want an apology anymore. She wanted satisfaction. And she was about to get it. The mask she wears. She finished her shift without another word. No apology. No protest. Just quiet compliance that fooled everyone into thinking she was harmless. By the time the gala ended, the ballroom smelled of spilled champagne and expensive cologne, and the guests left glowing with self-satisfaction. They hugged, exchanged business cards, promised donations, and praised themselves for caring about uplifting the less fortunate. She emptied trash cans filled with untouched food. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. She walked past the valet stand, past luxury cars that hummed like sleeping animals, past people who didn't notice her until she was already gone. Only when she reached the employee locker room did she finally stop holding her breath. Her reflection stared back at her from a cracked mirror. Same tired eyes. Same pulled back hair. Same uniform that made people forget she was human. She laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because it was absurd. They only knew. She changed clothes slowly, deliberately. Folded the uniform. Placed it in her locker with care. It wasn't shame she felt when she locked it, it was control. She chose this. She always had. Her phone vibrated. A single message. "Are you okay?" She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "I'm fine. I saw everything." Another pause. "Do you want me to shut it down?" She exhaled through her nose and smiled for the first time that night. Not yet. The reason she worked there wasn't desperation. It was observation. 6 months earlier she had walked into that same hotel through the front doors, not the service entrance, and signed a partnership agreement worth more than the entire building. She remembered the way the manager had shaken her hand too tightly, eyes flicking over her clothes, clearly surprised she wasn't older, richer looking, louder. She remembered how they underestimated her then too. And she remembered how she let them. The cleaning job came later. After the complaints. After the anonymous reports. After whispers of exploitation, unpaid overtime, harassment quietly buried under NDAs and luxury branding. She had wanted to see it herself. Not from a boardroom. From the floor. So she applied under a different name. Different hair. Different posture. No makeup. No confidence allowed to show. She learned quickly how invisible she could become if she wanted to be. She learned who snapped fingers instead of saying "excuse me." Who spilled drinks without apology. Who smiled publicly and humiliated privately. And tonight? Tonight had confirmed everything. She drove home in silence, city lights streaking past the windshield. Her apartment was modest by design. Nothing flashy, nothing that invited assumptions. She kicked off her shoes and stood barefoot on the cool floor, letting the stillness settle into her bones. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, replaying the man's voice in her head. "You people." Her jaw tightened. She didn't want revenge. She wanted truth. And she wanted it in a way that couldn't be dismissed, silenced, or brushed aside with money. Her phone rang. This time she answered. They crossed the line, the voice on the other end said. "Come. Controlled. Loyal." "They crossed it a long time ago," she replied. "Tonight they just made it obvious." There was a brief silence. Then, "Media?" She shook her head even though he couldn't see her. "Not yet. First, I want them comfortable. Confident. I want them to believe nothing will happen. And then?" She looked at her reflection in the dark window. No uniform. No disguise. Just her. "Then I want them to realize who was cleaning up after them." The next morning she returned to work. Same uniform. Same silence. The man from the gala was there again, barking orders at staff as if the building belonged to him. He barely glanced at her this time. Good. She pushed her cart down the hallway, listening. Watching. Recording nothing with her phone, she didn't need to. The systems already existed. The evidence already lived in numbers, in contracts, in payroll discrepancies and false reports. She paused outside a conference room where executives laughed over coffee. One of them said, "Honestly, these people should be grateful. We give them jobs." She closed her eyes for a brief second. Grateful. She rolled the cart forward. But this time as she did, she felt something new beneath the anger and restraint. Anticipation. Because the wheels were already in motion. Meetings were being scheduled. Emails drafted. Invitations sent. And soon, very soon, the people who had looked through her, spoken over her, reduced her to a mop and a stain, would have to look at her again. And realize they had made a very expensive mistake. The room changes. The invitation arrived 3 days later. Same hotel. Same ballroom. Different reason. An emergency stakeholder briefing, the email said. Mandatory attendance for partners, sponsors, and senior executives. No press. No explanations. Just urgency. The man who had pointed at the imaginary stain read the message twice, irritation tightening his jaw. He didn't like surprises, especially ones he didn't control. Still, the hotel belonged to the network he financed, so he assumed this was just another minor issue that would disappear once the right people spoke. He didn't spare a single thought for the cleaning staff. That afternoon she arrived early. Not through the service entrance this time. Through the front doors. The doorman straightened instantly, uncertainty flickering across his face as he took her in. Tailored black suit. Clean lines. Hair loose, natural. No uniform. No badge. "Good afternoon," she said calmly. He hesitated, then opened the door wide. "Welcome." Inside, the lobby buzzed with tension. Executives clustered in low voices. Phones were checked, then checked again. A few noticed her and looked away quickly, assuming she was someone else's problem. She smiled to herself. Good. She took a seat in the front row. The room slowly filled. The man from the gala sat 2 rows behind her, complaining quietly to a colleague about wasted time and incompetent management. He didn't recognize the back of her head. Why would he? When the lights dimmed, the chatter died instantly. A man stepped onto the stage, well-known, respected, neutral. The kind of person companies trusted to handle crises discreetly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he began. "I'll be direct." Pause. "Our firm was commissioned to conduct a full operational and ethical audit of this property and its affiliated events." Murmurs rippled through the room. The man behind her stiffened. The speaker continued, voice steady. "What we found was concerning." A screen lit up behind him. Numbers, charts, timelines, unpaid overtime, wage discrepancies, staff reassigned after complaints, security footage mysteriously missing on certain dates, incident reports rewritten, names altered. The room shifted. She felt it, the moment the air changed. "This," the speaker said, "was not an accident. It was a pattern." Someone raised a hand. "Who commissioned this audit?" The speaker glanced toward her. "All findings were requested and verified by the primary investor and oversight authority." Silence. Every head turned. She stood, slowly, calmly. The man from the gala frowned, confusion crossing his face as recognition sparked, not of who she was, but of who she had been. Her eyes met his, and held. "My name," she said evenly, "is Elena Moore." A few gasps. A few whispers. The people who knew exactly who she was went very still. "I am the majority stakeholder of this property," she continued, "and the founder of the compliance firm conducting this investigation." Someone muttered, "That's not possible." She smiled gently. "I assure you it is." The man who had told her to clean a spot that didn't exist felt his stomach drop. She turned slightly, just enough to face him fully. "I also worked here," she added. "Recently. Under a different name." The room froze. "I cleaned floors, emptied trash, took verbal abuse, watched how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching." Her voice never rose. "That was the most unsettling part. I heard how some of you speak about those people. I saw how complaints were handled. I experienced firsthand what many of your employees live with every day." She let that sink in. Then she said the words that made his blood run cold. "You told me I missed a spot." A sharp intake of breath echoed somewhere. "You told me to try harder. You referred to me as you people." She took one step closer to the edge of the stage. "I want you to understand something very clearly," she said. "Nothing that happens next is personal." She gestured to the screen. "It's procedural." The speaker resumed. "Effective immediately, senior management is suspended pending review. Contracts are frozen. Authorities have been notified regarding labor violations." Voices erupted. "This is outrageous. You can't." "My lawyers." She raised one hand. The room fell silent again. "You absolutely can," she said. "And you will." Her gaze swept across the audience, calm, unflinching. "This organization was built on the idea of prestige," she continued. "But prestige without respect is just decoration." She looked directly at the man again. "And respect," she said softly, "is not something you give only to people you think matter." He couldn't look away. For the first time in his life, power had shifted, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. She took her seat. The meeting continued without her. But the message was already delivered, and everyone in that room knew it. When the spotlight turns, the fallout was immediate. Phones rang nonstop. Lawyers spoke in hushed, urgent tones. People who had laughed comfortably days earlier now avoided eye contact as if it were contagious. Security escorted executives from offices they had ruled for years, while assistants stood frozen, unsure whether to follow orders or distance themselves from disgrace. News didn't break publicly, not yet, but within elite circles the story spread like wildfire. The hotel was no longer a symbol of luxury. It was a liability. Elena watched it all from her office across the city, a quiet room with glass walls and no decorations meant to impress. She reviewed documents, signed authorizations, and approved protections for employees who had been too afraid to speak before. Names crossed her desk. People she remembered. A young woman who flinched every time a supervisor passed. A maintenance worker who had been reassigned after filing a complaint. A man who worked night shifts because daylight management didn't like his accent. She approved back pay, restorations, legal support. One by one lives shifted. And then there was him. The man who had told her to try harder. He requested a meeting on the second day. Please, his assistant had written. He just wants to explain. Elena stared at the email for a long moment before replying. Tomorrow. 10 minutes. That was all he got. He arrived early. No confidence this time. No careless charm. His suit was the same, but it didn't sit the same way on his shoulders. He stood when she entered, hands clasped tightly in front of him like a student waiting to be reprimanded. Ms. Moore, he said quickly. Thank you for seeing me. She didn't correct him. She sat across from him and opened a folder, not to look at it, but to let the sound echo in the quiet room. You have 9 minutes, she said. He swallowed. I want to apologize. She waited. I didn't know, he continued, who you were. And I never would have. She raised a hand gently. Stop, she said. If the only thing preventing cruelty is knowing someone's status, then the problem isn't ignorance. His face flushed. That's not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant, she replied. And I know exactly what you did. He looked down. I was under a lot of pressure, he said weakly. That night was stressful. I didn't mean to. She leaned forward. That night, she said, was my job. He froze. You had power, she continued. Not over the building. Over a moment. And you chose humiliation because it was easy. Silence stretched. He finally whispered, What do you want? She considered him for a long second. I want you to remember, she said, every time you speak to someone you think is beneath you, that the world is bigger than your assumptions. He nodded rapidly. Of course. I will. She stood. And for the record, she added, you don't work here anymore. His head snapped up. You're firing me? No, she corrected. The board is. I just made sure they saw what I saw. Security was already outside the door. As he was escorted away, Elena felt no triumph. Only closure. 3 days later, the story went public. Headlines avoided her name at first, focusing instead on luxury hotel exposed for labor violations and executives suspended after internal audit. But people talked. Employees shared stories. Former staff spoke openly for the first time. And then someone leaked the truth. A cleaning worker. A gala. A mop. And the woman who turned out to own the room. The internet did the rest. Messages flooded in. Some apologetic. Some admiring. Some defensive. Some angry. She ignored most of them. What mattered were the ones that came quietly. Emails from staff thanking her for seeing them. Notes from people who said they felt less invisible. One message that simply said, I didn't know someone like you existed. Thank you for showing me it's possible. Elena sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about correction. And there was one last thing to do. The satisfaction she chose. The ballroom looked different in daylight. Without music. Without champagne. Without people pretending to be generous. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, revealing scuff marks no one usually noticed and corners that had never been polished properly. Elena stood alone at the center of the room, hands folded behind her back, listening to the quiet echo of her footsteps on the same marble she had once scrubbed on her knees. This time she wasn't here to clean. She was here to decide. The hotel's interim board waited nearby, nervous, careful, respectful in a way that felt rehearsed but necessary. They spoke in measured tones, using words like restructuring, rebuilding trust, and long-term cultural reform. Elena listened. Then she spoke. This building doesn't need new leadership, she said calmly. It needs a new memory. They leaned in. She continued, I don't want this to be another scandal people forget once the headlines fade. I want it to change how this place works, permanently. She handed them a document. A policy unlike anything they had seen before. Every executive would rotate through frontline roles. Cleaning, maintenance, service. Not as a stunt. Not for cameras. Quietly. Regularly. Anonymously. No titles, Elena said. No exceptions. One board member hesitated. That's unconventional. So was pretending exploitation didn't exist, she replied. They nodded. The policy passed unanimously. 2 weeks later, the hotel reopened. Same address. Different atmosphere. Staff meetings began with listening instead of instructions. Complaints were tracked transparently. Schedules were fair. Paychecks accurate. For the first time, workers walked the halls without flinching. Elena returned once more. Not in a suit. In jeans. She walked through the lobby unnoticed and smiled. At the front desk, a new employee greeted her warmly. "Good afternoon. Welcome." Not because she looked important, because it was his job to treat everyone that way. She passed the ballroom. A new plaque had been installed near the entrance. Small. Easy to miss. It didn't name her. It simply read, "Dignity is not a perk. It is a requirement." She stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Satisfaction didn't rush in all at once. It settled. Quiet. Complete. Real. Not the kind that came from watching someone fall, but from knowing fewer people would have to kneel where she once had. As she walked toward the exit, a cleaning cart rolled past her. The woman pushing it met her eyes and smiled. "Have a good day," the woman said. "You too," Elena replied. And this time, that was enough.